starting live. Yes, hi. Oh, that's better. Oh, look, let there be light. Yes, we like that. Well, it's a bright sunny day today in Tahunga. It is no longer rainy and cold and weird, so it's really bright in here. I actually had to pull the blinds and it's no longer dark. It's gorgeous. The weather is gorgeous. It stopped raining. It stopped hailing. It's spring. It's lovely. And I have my new spring pink bonnet. I have bonnets. I have bonnets in stock. That's a thing. It's happening. So I do have the bonnets in stock. Not a lot, but more than I had a few days ago. So if you are ordering bonnets, that can be a thing. Well, hi, it's Alison Arngrim, and I'm in the living room again. Still, I never left. And oh, look, everyone's like, we're here. We're starting another book. So, okay, so I did all of Little House in the Big Woods, which is the first book that Laura wrote, and then Dean Butler, Al Manzo, read all of Farmer Boy, which is Al Manzo's story. So the next book in the series is the one that Little House on the Prairie, the one it's all named for. Now, weirdly, the show is not really based on this one, Little House on the Prairie. It's based on the banks of Plum Creek, because on the banks of Plum Creek had, like, you know, Miss Beadle and church and school and stuff to do, which was made a better TV show. So, but this is Little House on the Prairie, which, if you ever saw the pilot of the show, where they're out on the prairie and the thing in the covered wagon, that's this part here. So here we go. Are you ready? I got. What do I got? I got some lemonade. I made this, and thank you, lemons, Brenda. Yay! And I have some chips. They're healthy. They're Trader Joe's. They're organic, low salt. So okay, this is going west, because I love this beginning. A long time ago, when all the grandfathers and grandmothers of today were little boys and little girls, or very small babies, or perhaps not even born, Pa and Ma and Mary and Laura and baby Carrie left their little house in the big woods of Wisconsin. They drove away and left it lonely and empty in the clearing among the big trees, and they never saw that little house again. Pa said there were too many people in the big woods now. Quite often, Laura heard the ringing thud of an axe, which was not Pa's axe, or the echo of a shot that did not come from his gun. The path that went by the little house had become a road. Almost every day, Laura and Mary stopped their playing and stared in surprise at a wagon slowly creaking by on that road. Okay, they actually saw another human being within 8 billion miles, and they decided that it's just so crowded. This is so big. I actually saw another human, so, oh my God, I have to move. So, yeah, okay. Wild animals would not stay in a country where there were so many people. Pa did not like to stay either. He liked a country where the wild animals lived without being afraid. He liked to see the little fawns and their mothers looking at him from the shadowy woods, and the fat, lazy bears eating berries in the wild berry patches. He liked a country where the bears, could just wander around. Okay. In the long winter evenings, he talked to Ma about the western country. In the west, the land was level, and there were no trees. The grass grew thick and high. There, the wild animals wandered and fed as though they were in a pasture that stretched much farther than a man could see, and there were no settlers. Only Indians lived there. Now, yes, you see this 1800s. Pa's like, there's no settlers there. There's just the people who, I don't know, settled it a couple of thousand years ago. The Indians, but they're like, it's just Indians. It's okay. Yeah, and it wasn't, but there you go. One day, in the very last of the winter, Pa said to Ma, "Seeing you don't object, I've decided to go see the West. I've had an offer for this place, and we can sell it now for as much as we're ever likely to get, enough to give us a start in a new country." "Oh, Charles, must we go now?" Ma said. The weather was so cold, and the snug house was so comfortable. "If we are going this year, we must go now," said Pa. "We can't get across the Mississippi after the ice breaks." Now, he's just said, if you don't mind, I'd like to leave everything that we've known and go across. This was a normal thing to do then. And as they said, a new country. To them, to move to that other part, well, it wasn't America yet. It was a new country. So they're serious, like international travel. And they do have to go before the ice breaks. So Pa sold the little house. He sold the cow and the calf. He made hickory bows and fastened them upright to the wagon box. Ma helped him stretch white canvas over them. Oh, well, you know what that is. That's a covered wagon. That's what happens when you do that. You get a little Conestoga there. In the thin dark before morning, Ma gently shook Mary and Laura till they got up. In firelight and candlelight, she washed and combed them and dressed them warmly. Over their long red flannel underwear, she put wool petticoats and wool dresses and long wool stockings. Itchy. She put their coats on them and their rabbit skin hoods and their red yarn mittens. They're going to be warm. Everything from the little house was in the wagon, except the beds and the tables and the chairs. They did not need to take these because Pa could always make new ones. Imagine living with someone where you're like, should we bring the furniture? Nah, I'll just make you some. You had somebody around who could just like make you a house full of furniture. It's like, we don't need to bring it. I'll just make you more. Okay. There was thin snow on the ground. The air was still and cold and dark. The bare trees stood up against the frosty stars. But in the east, the sky was pale, and through the gray woods came lanterns with wagons and horses bringing Grandpa and Grandma and aunts and uncles and cousins. Mary and Laura clung tight to their rag dolls and did not say anything. The cousins stood around and looked at them. Grandma and all the aunts hugged and kissed them again, saying goodbye. So the whole family come out and say goodbye because they might never, ever come back. Because that's a thing that really could happen. That never. Pa hung his gun to the wagon bows inside the canvas top where he could reach it quickly from the seat. He hung his bullet pouch and powder horn beneath it. He laid the fiddle box carefully between pillows where jolting would not hurt the fiddle. The uncles helped him hitch the horses to the wagon. All the cousins were told to kiss Mary and Laura, so they did. Pa picked up Mary, then Laura, and set them on the bed in the back of the wagon. He helped Ma climb up to the wagon seat, and Grandma reached up and gave her baby Carrie. Pa swung up and sat beside Ma, and Jack, the brindle bulldog, went under the wagon. Poor doggy. So they all went away from the little log house. The shutters were over the windows, so the little house could not see them go. It stayed there inside the log fence, behind the two big oak trees that in the summertime had made green roofs for Mary and Laura to play under. And that was the last of the little house. Just like, bye, after all that work. Pa promised that when they came to the west, Laura should see a papoose. I beg your pardon. What is a papoose? She asked him, and he said, a papoose is a little brown Indian baby. Oh dear, yes, well, 1800s. But there you go. As opposed to Ma, who was like, You'll hear a lot from Ma about she does not like the Native Americans at all. Whereas Pa and Laura are like, it's gonna be good. It'll be fine. We'll go live among the Indians. They drove a long way through the snowy woods till they came to the town of Pepin. Mary and Laura had seen it once before, but it looked different now. The door of the store and the doors of all the houses were shut. The stumps were covered with snow, and no little children were playing outdoors. Big cords of wood stood among the stumps. Only 2 or 3 men in boots and fur caps and bright plaid coats were to be seen. Ma and Laura and Mary ate bread and molasses in the wagon. Oh, that actually sounds kind of good. And molasses in the wagon. And the horses ate corn from nose bags. While inside the store, Pa traded his furs for things they would need on the journey. They could not stay long in the town because they must cross the lake that day. The enormous lake stretched flat and smooth and white all the way to the edge of the gray sky. Wagon tracks went way across it, so far that you could not see where they went. They ended in nothing at all. Pa drove the wagon out onto the ice, following those wagon tracks. Okay, this is maybe a little dangerous, just a teeny bit. The horses' hooves clop clop with a dull sound. The wagon wheels went crunching. The town grew smaller and smaller behind, till even the tall store was only a dot. All around the wagon there was nothing but empty and silent space. Laura didn't like it. But Pa was on the wagon seat and Jack was under the wagon. She knew that nothing could hurt her while Pa and Jack were there. At last, the wagon was pulling up a slope of earth again, and again there were trees. Whew. There was a little log house, too, among the trees, so Laura felt better. Nobody lived in this little house. It was a place to camp in. It was a tiny house and strange, with a big fireplace and rough bunks against all the walls. But it was warm when Pa had built a fire in the fireplace. That night, Mary and Laura and baby Carrie slept with Ma in a bed made on the floor before the fire, while Pa slept outside in the wagon to guard it and the horses. And they have a picture, it's a little shed thing. And they kind of left those because people traveling would freeze to death. So there were little houses for them to park themselves in. Like a rest stop kind of thing. In the night, a strange noise wakened Laura. It sounded like a shot, but it was sharper and longer than a shot. Bang. Again and again she heard it. Bang, bang again. Mary and Carrie were asleep, but Laura couldn't sleep until Ma's voice came softly through the dark. "Go to sleep, Laura," Ma said. "It's only the ice breaking." Only the ice Only the ice that you just crossed 5 minutes ago. Aha! Next morning, Pa said, "It's lucky we crossed yesterday, Caroline. Wouldn't wonder if the ice broke up today. We made a late crossing and we're lucky it didn't start breaking up while we were out in the middle of it." I guess not. "I thought about that yesterday, Charles," Ma replied gently. Laura hadn't thought about it before, but now she thought what would have happened if the ice had cracked under the wagon wheels and they had all gone down into the cold water in the middle of the vast lake. "You're frightening somebody, Charles," Ma said, and Pa caught Laura up in his safe big hug. "We're across the Mississippi," he said, hugging her joyously. "How do you like that little half pint of sweet cider half drunk up? Do you like going out west where the Indians live?" Laura said she liked it, and she asked if they were in Indian country now. But no, they were not. They were in Minnesota. Minnesota, which of course was Indian country until probably the week before when they came to it. It was a long, long way to Indian territory. Almost every day, the horses traveled as far as they could. Almost every night, Pa and Ma made camp in a new place. Sometimes they had to stay several days in one camp because a creek was in flood and they couldn't cross it till the water went down. They crossed too many creeks to count. They saw strange woods and hills and stranger country with no trees. They drove across rivers on long wooden bridges, and they came to one wide yellow river that had no bridge. That was the Missouri River. Pa drove onto a raft, and they all sat still in the wagon while the raft went swaying away from the safe land and slowly crossed all the rolling, muddy, yellow water. See, so many people were crossing, they set up like a little barge system. They set up a little raft, and there's a rope. So travelers would come and go, "Oh, they send the raft back," and they'd get all their wagons and just pull the rope because that many people were crossing. And they all knew, they kept saying, "We're going to Indian territory." So even though it had all been Indian territory, they knew they were going out to the section that still technically under treaty was not theirs, still belonged to the Native Americans. And there was this constant, hey, let's westward expansion, tell the homesteaders to go ahead and get out there. And if we tell the homesteaders to go ahead and build their house on land that we haven't actually signed a treaty for, oopsie-daisies. So yeah, they knew they were kind of going to be in trouble. After more days, they came to hills again. In a valley, the wagon stuck fast in deep black mud. Rain poured down, and thunder crashed, and lightning flared. There was no place to make camp and build a fire. Everything was damp and chill and miserable in the wagon. but they had to stay in it and eat cold bits of food. Next day, Pa found a place on a hillside where they could camp. The rain had stopped, but they had to wait a week before the creek went down and the mud dried so that Pa could dig the wagon wheels out of it and go on. Not wait a few hours, not wait a day, a week. Yeah, we're sitting here going, oh, gee, we're in that. They had to sit there in a cold, rainy mud pile with the wagon and go, about a week. We'll just be here for 7 days waiting to dig ourselves out. I'm horrified. I would not. I'm so glad I was not. Because I wish I lived in the 1800s. Probably no. One day, while they were waiting, a tall, lean man came out of the woods riding a black pony. He and Pa talked a while. Then they went off into the woods together. And when they came back, both of them were riding black ponies. What? Pa had traded the tired brown horses for those ponies. They were beautiful little horses, and Pa said they were not really ponies, they were Western Mustangs. They're strong as mules and gentle as kittens, Pa said. They had large, soft, gentle eyes, and long manes and tails, and slender legs and feet, much smaller, quicker than the feet of horses in the big woods. I don't know, they had like Clydesdales or something, I mean. But he just, like, they're traveling, and it, like, some stranger comes out of the forest, and he's like, oh, great, I'm going to go sell some horses to this guy who just walked out of the woods. When Laura asked what their names were, Pa said that she and Mary could name them. So Mary named one Pet, and Laura named the other Patty. Oh. When the creek's roar was not so loud and the road was drier, Pa dug the wagon out of the mud. He hitched Pet and Patty to it, and they all went on together. Okay, so there's no phones and no way of communicating, and yet a guy who needed to sell his horses, like, found them, and he said, oh, but sure, how? How does that even happen? They had come in the covered wagon all the long way from the big woods of Wisconsin, across Minnesota and Iowa and Missouri. All that long way, Jack had trotted under the wagon. You poor dog. Now, they set out to go across Kansas. Kansas was an endless flat land covered with tall grass blowing in the wind. Day after day they traveled in Kansas and saw nothing but the rippling grass and the enormous sky. In a perfect circle, the sky curved down to the level land, and the wagon was in the circle's exact middle. All day long, Pet and Patty went forward, trotting, walking, and trotting again, but they couldn't get out of the middle of that circle. When the sun went down, the circle was still around them, and the edge of the sky was pink. Then slowly, the land became black. The wind made a lonely sound in the grass. The campfire was small and lost in so much space, but large stars hung from the sky, glittering so near that Laura felt she could almost touch them. Next day, the land was the same. The sky was the same, and the circle did not change. Laura and Mary were tired of them all. There was nothing new to do and nothing new to look at. The bed was made in the back of the wagon and neatly covered with a gray blanket. Laura and Mary sat on it. The canvas sides of the wagon top were rolled up and tied so the prairie wind blew in, whipped Laura's straight brown hair and Mary's golden curls every which way, and the strong light screwed up their eyelids. Sometimes a big jackrabbit bounded in big bounds away over the blowing grass. Jack paid no attention. Good dog. Poor Jack was tired too, and his paws were sore from traveling so far. Why do they not let the dog in the wagon? I mean, I know it's the 1800s. The dog, just for a day, the dog could get up. I don't know. Poor Jack. So poor Jack is tired, and his poor little feet. The wagon kept on jolting. The canvas top snapped in the wind. 2 faint wheel tracks kept going away behind the wagon, always the same. Poor Pa. Pa's back was hunched. The reins were loose in his hands, and the wind blew his long brown beard. Ma sat straight and quiet, her hands folded in her lap. Baby Carrie slept in a nest among the soft bundles. Well, that sounds fun. Oh, wow, Mary yawned. Oh! And Laura said, Ma, can't we get out and run behind the wagon? My legs are so tired. Sitting and saying, no, Laura, said Ma. Aren't we going to camp pretty soon? Laura asked. It seemed such a long time since noon when they'd eaten their lunch sitting on the clean grass in the shade of the wagon. Pa answered, not yet. It's too early to camp now. I want to camp now. I'm so tired, Laura said. Then Ma said, Laura. That was all. But it meant that Laura must not complain. So she did not complain any more out loud, but she was still naughty inside. She sat and thought complaints to herself. Her legs ached, and the wind wouldn't stop blowing her hair. The grass waved and the wagon jolted, and then nothing else happened for a long time. We're coming to a creek or a river, Pa said. Girls, can you see the trees ahead? Laura stood up and held to one of the wagon bows. Far ahead, she saw a low, dark smudge. That's trees, Pa said. You can tell by the shape of the shadows. In this country, trees mean water. That's where we'll camp tonight. And they made it to the next creek. Now, they've already crossed huge river and frozen lake and all of this, but yet chapter 2 is called Crossing the Creek. Like, it was amazing that they haven't drowned. They did the bridge, they did the barge, they did across the ice that broke 5 minutes later, but now we're going to do the insanely dangerous crossing of the creek. Pet and Patty began to trot briskly, as if they were glad to. Laura held tight to the wagon bow and stood up in the jolting wagon. Beyond Pa's shoulder and far across the waves of green grass, she could see the trees, and they were not like any trees she had seen before. They were no taller than bushes. Whoa, said Pa suddenly. Now which way? He muttered to himself, because there's like no signs. The road divided here, and you could not tell which was the more traveled way. Both of them were faint wheel tracks in the grass. One went toward the west, the other sloped downward a little toward the south. Both soon vanished in the tall, blowing grass. Right, how do you get... I'm going west, and at no point did anyone produce like a compass and say, we're going... No, just the stars at night and the sun. That's it. They're just like, is there a road? Oh, there's no road. Oh, look, there's sort of a road here, but I don't know where it goes. That was it. You just drove and hoped you didn't get lost or die or fall in a river. That's kind of terrifying. Better go downhill, I guess, Bob decided, because he, I don't know, flipped a coin. The creeks down in the bottom must be, this is the way to the ford. He turned Pet and Patty toward the south. The road went down and up again over gently curving land. The trees were nearer now, but they were no taller. Then Laura gasped and clutched the wagon bow, for almost under Pet and Patty's noses there was no more blowing grass. There was no land at all. She looked beyond the edge of the land and across the tops of trees. The road turned there. For a little way, it went along the cliff's top, and then it went sharply downward. Pa put on the brakes. Pet and Patty braced themselves backward and almost sat down. The wagon wheels slid onward little by little, lowering the wagon farther down the steep slope into the ground. Jagged cliffs of bare red earth rose up on both sides of the wagon. Grass waved along the tops, but nothing grew on their seen straight up and down sides. They were hot, and the heat came from them against Laura's face. The wind was still blowing overhead, but it did not blow down into this deep crack in the ground. The stillness seemed strange and empty. It was like a ravine of clay. Icky. Then, once more, the wagon was level. The narrow crack down which it had come opened into the bottomlands. Here grew the tall trees whose tops Laura had seen from the prairie above. Shady groves were scattered on the rolling meadows, and in the groves deer were lying down, hardly to be seen among the shadows. The deer turned their heads toward the wagon, and curious fawns stood up to see it more clearly. Laura was surprised, because she did not see the creek, but the bottomlands were wide. Down here below the prairie, there were gentle hills and open sunny places. The air was still and hot. Under the wagon wheels, the ground was soft. In the sunny open spaces, the grass grew thin, and deer had cropped it short. This is like they saw no one, no animals, anything for the prairie, and then they kind of went down into the, like near the river, all the little animals in the shade. For a while, The high bare cliffs of red earth stood up behind the wagon, but they were almost hidden behind hills and trees when Pet and Patty stopped to drink from the creek. The rushing sound of the water filled the still air. All along the creek banks the trees hung over it and made it dark with shadows. In the middle it ran swiftly, sparkling silver and blue. "This creek's pretty high," Pa said, "but I guess we can make it all right. You can see this is a ford by the old wheel ruts. What do you say, Carolyn?" Oh, yikes. "Whatever you say, Charles," Ma answered. No. Pet and Patty lifted their wet noses. They pricked their ears forward, looking at the creek. Then they pricked them backward to hear what Pa would say. They sighed and laid their soft noses together to whisper to each other. A little way upstream, Jack was lapping the water with his red tongue. "I'll tie down the wagon cover," Pa said. He climbed down from the seat, unrolled the canvas sides, and tied them firmly to the wagon box. Then he pulled the rope at the back so that the canvas puckered together in the middle, leaving a tiny round hole too small to see through. We closed up the whole Conestoga wagon, so it's like sealed. That's probably a good idea. Mary huddled down on the bed. She did not like fords, and she was afraid of the rushing water. But Laura was excited. She liked the splashing. Pa climbed to the seat, saying, "They may have to swim out there in the middle, but we'll make it all right, Caroline." Laura thought of Jack and said, "I wish Jack could ride in the wagon, Pa." Pa did not answer. He gathered the reins tightly in his hands. Ma said, "Jack can swim, Laura. He will be all right." The wagon went forward softly in mud. Water began to splash against the wheels. The splashing grew louder. The wagon shook as the noisy water struck at it. Then all at once, the wagon lifted and balanced and swayed. Oh, it was a lovely feeling. The noise stopped. Ma said sharply, "Lie down, girls." Quick as a flash, Mary and Laura dropped flat on the bed. When Ma spoke like that, they did as they were told. Ma's arm pulled a smothering blanket over them, heads and all. "Be still, just as you are. Don't move," she said, because the wagon is floating and it's dangerous here. Mary did not move. She was trembling and still. But Laura could not help wriggling a little bit. She did so want to see what was happening. She could feel the wagon swaying and turning. The splashing was noisy again, and again it died away. Then Pa's voice frightened Laura. It said, "Take them, Carolyn." The wagon lurched. There was a sudden heavy splash beside it. Laura sat straight up and clawed the blanket from her head. Pa was gone. Ma sat alone, holding tight to the reins with both hands. Mary hid her face in the blanket again, but Laura rose up farther. She couldn't see the creek bank. She couldn't see anything in front of the wagon but water rushing at it. And in the water, 3 heads, Pet's head and Patty's head, and Pa's small wet head. Pa's fist in the water was holding tight to Pet's bridle. Laura could faintly hear Pa's voice through the rushing of the water. It sounded calm and cheerful, but she couldn't hear what he said. He was talking to the horses. Ma's face was white and scared. So it's so bad that he has gotten out of the wagon and is treading water, swimming along to lead the now swimming horses. And Ma is holding the reins with her small children in the wagon. And yes, she has gone pale from shock and terror at this point. "Lie down, Laura," Ma said. Laura lay down. She felt cold and sick. Her eyes were shut tight, but she could still see the terrible water and Pa's brown beard drowning in it. For a long, long time, the wagon swayed and swung, and Mary cried without making a sound, and Laura's stomach felt sicker and sicker. Then the front wheels struck and grated, and Pa shouted. The whole wagon jerked and jolted and tipped backward, but the wheels were turning on the ground. Laura was up again, holding to the seat. She saw Pet's and Patty's scrambling wetbacks climbing a steep bank, and Pa running beside them, shouting, "Hi, Patty! Hi, Pet! Get up! Get up! Whoopsie daisy! Good girls!" He actually just said whoopsie daisy to the horses. At the top of the bank, they stood still, panting and dripping, and the wagon stood still, safely out of that creek. Pa stood panting and dripping too, and Ma said, "Oh, Charles!" There there, Caroline, said Pa. We're all safe, thanks to a good tight wagon box well fastened to the running gear. I never saw a creek rise so fast in my life. Pet and Patty are good swimmers, but I guess they wouldn't have made it if I hadn't helped them. If Pa had not known what to do, or if Ma had been too frightened to drive, or if Laura and Mary had been naughty and had bothered her, then they would all have been lost. The river would have rolled them over and over and carried them away and drowned them, and nobody would have ever known what became of them. For weeks, perhaps, no other person would come along that road. Well, said Pa, all's well that ends well. And Ma said, Charles, you're wet to the skin. See, this was the thing. You're traveling and all these hazards they keep running into. If something goes wrong, if there's a horrible accident, AAA is not coming to tow you. Nobody's going to show up and call 911. No one's going to show up. The next people coming west on that road, weeks, months, maybe never. And if you are injured or drowning, you're just dead, and they didn't even find your bodies for like a really long time. It's just like, I wonder whatever happened. They went west. We never heard from them again. And that's kind of horrible. And Pa's like, oh, it's great. All's well that ends well. But before Pa could answer, Laura cried, oh, where's Jack? Where's the dog? Where's the dog? Oh my God, where's the dog? They had forgotten Jack. They had left him on the other side of that dreadful water, and now they could not see him anywhere. He must have tried to swim after them, but they could not see him struggling in the water now. Laura swallowed hard to keep from crying. She knew it was shameful to cry, but there was crying inside her. All the long way from Wisconsin, poor Jack had followed them so patiently and faithfully, and now they had left him to drown. It's harsh. He was so tired, and they might have taken him into the wagon. He had stood on the bank and seen the wagon going away from him, as if they didn't care for him at all, and he would never know how much they wanted him. He just let the dog drown. Pa said he wouldn't have done such a thing to Jack, not for $1 million. If he'd known how that creek would rise when they were in midstream, he would never have let Jack try to swim it. But that can't be helped now, he said. He went far up and down the creek bank, looking for Jack, calling him, and whistling for him. It was no use. Jack was gone. At last, there was nothing to do but go on. Pet and Patty were rested. Pa's clothes had dried on him while he searched for Jack. He took the reins again and drove uphill out of the river bottoms. Laura looked back all the way. She knew she wouldn't see Jack again, but she wanted to. She didn't see anything but low curves of land coming between the wagon and the creek, and beyond the creek those strange cliffs of red earth rose up again. Then other bluffs just like them stood up in front of the wagon. Faint wheel tracks went into a crack between those earthen walls. Pet and Patty climbed till the crack became a small grassy valley, and the valley widened out onto the high prairie once more. No road, not even the faintest trace of wheels or of a rider's passing, could be seen anywhere. The prairie looked as if no human eye had ever seen it before. Only the tall wild grass covered the endless empty land, and a great empty sky reached over it. Far away, the sun's edge touched the rim of the earth. The sun was enormous, and it was throbbing and pulsing with light. All around the sky's edge ran a pale pink glow, and above the pink was yellow, and above that blue. And above the blue, the sky was no color at all. Purple shadows were gathering over the land, and the wind was mourning. Pa stopped the Mustangs. He and Ma got out of the wagon to make camp, and Mary and Laura climbed down to the ground too. Oh, Ma, Laura begged. Jack has gone to heaven, hasn't he? He was such a good dog. Can't he go to heaven? Ma did not know what to answer, but Pa said, yes, Laura, he can. God that doesn't forget the sparrows won't leave a good dog like Jack out in that cold. Laura felt only a little better. She was not happy. Pa did not whistle about his work as usual, and after a while he said, and what we'll do in a wild country without a good watchdog, I don't know. Okay, so that's like depressing. And that's the end of chapter 2. I don't know, I could do like spoiler alerts? No. But that was really sad. So right now, the dog is missing and presumed dead. Because it's the 1800s and things are horrible. So tomorrow, we'll do Camp on the High Prairie, and which I believe is followed by High Prairie, followed by Prairie Day. It's just all prairie all the time here. So more terrible things happen. They cross more dangerous land and water, and it's kind of like through the whole book. And then they meet a lot of Native Americans, and Ma says really bad things about them, and Pa and Laura say, no, stop saying bad things about them. Stop that, Ma. But because it's the 1800s. So yeah, the prairie was rough, and this crossing Kansas thing was just brutal stuff. But they, she obviously lived because she wrote the books. We'll do it again tomorrow, and tomorrow is Easter. Passover's like still going. People are already having Seder. So it's like all the holidays. It's great. Tomorrow we're going to do Easter. I have some eggs. I managed to get eggs, and I boiled them yesterday. And tonight we're going to sit around and color eggs because I snagged one of those egg color kits. And I'm going to make a pie. I keep saying this. I'm going to make a pie. No, I am. I'm going to make a pie. And tomorrow we're going to make like something good for Easter and pie. And we're gonna dress up. We're gonna like set the table and get like pink tablecloth and be all Eastery. And we're gonna like dress up like it is Easter, because it is, even if there's nobody here but us. And have like Easter dinner and pie. So there, and colored eggs and chocolate. That's much. I have chocolate bunnies. I do have chocolate bunnies. So I hope you were able to snag some chocolate bunnies before you locked yourself in your house. We got a little bit of candy or something, an egg or two. Happy Easter, happy Passover, happy everything. Be sure to wash your hands and stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow.